The bright afternoon sun beat down on Amara Johnson's navy blue sedan as she drove home from the university library. The air conditioning hummed softly, barely audible under the gentle sounds of a piano melody playing through her speakers. Her dashboard clock read 3:47 p.m. 3 thick law textbooks sat on the passenger seat beside her, along with a folder bursting with highlighted notes. Finals were only 2 weeks away, and Amara had spent the entire day studying for her civil rights law exam. At 25, Amara was in her second year of law school, following a path that made her parents beam with pride. She had always been drawn to justice. The concept fascinated her since she was a little girl listening to her father's stories about his legal cases. Now she was making her own way, determined to graduate at the top of her class. The familiar streets of her neighborhood came into view as she turned onto Maple Avenue. Amara adjusted her rearview mirror and noticed blue and red lights flashing behind her. Her brow furrowed as she checked her speed, 28 in a 30 zone. She hadn't run any stop signs or made any illegal turns. Still, she did what she'd been taught to do her entire life. She signaled, pulled over to the side of the road, turned off her music, rolled her window down halfway, and placed her hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. The police cruiser stopped about 10 feet behind her. Through her mirrors, Amara could see 2 officers inside. They sat there for nearly a minute before finally stepping out. The taller officer approached her window, while his partner stood slightly behind him. "License and registration," the officer said without introducing himself. His nameplate read Brennan. He didn't specify why he had pulled her over. "May I ask why I'm being stopped, Officer Brennan?" Amara asked politely, her hands still visible on the wheel. Officer Brennan's expression hardened. "License and registration first, then we can chat about why." Amara nodded. "My registration is in the glove compartment and my license is in my purse on the back seat. I'm going to reach for them now, okay?" The officer gave a curt nod. Amara moved slowly, retrieving her documents and handing them to the officer. He took them without a word and walked back to his cruiser. The second officer, whose nameplate read Kowalski, remained standing by her car, watching her through the window with an unsettling stare. 5 minutes passed before Officer Brennan returned. "Step out of the vehicle, please." Amara's heart skipped a beat. "May I ask why, sir? I don't believe I've violated any traffic laws." "We've had reports of drug trafficking in this area. Your car matches a description." His tone suggested he wasn't interested in further questions. Amara knew this was unusual. Her clean, modest sedan couldn't possibly match any drug dealer's profile. She lived in this neighborhood. She drove this route every day. Something wasn't right. "Officer, I'm a law student returning from the university library. I live just 3 blocks from here. I haven't done anything wrong." The second officer, Kowalski, moved closer to her window. "Pretty girl like you in law school? That's impressive. What kind of law are you studying? Criminal defense? You defending the bad guys?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Civil rights law, actually," Amara replied, her voice steady despite her growing unease. "Civil rights, huh?" Kowalski exchanged a glance with his partner. "You one of those people who thinks the police are the enemy?" Before Amara could respond, Officer Brennan cut in. "Step out of the car now or we'll have to make you." Amara felt a chill run down her spine. With as much dignity as she could muster, she reached for her phone on the car mount. "Leave the phone," Brennan ordered. "I have the right to record this interaction," Amara stated calmly, though her heart was racing. She pressed record and placed the phone in her shirt pocket. Camera, facing outward. "I'm complying with your order to exit the vehicle, but I'm recording this stop as is my legal right." As she stepped out of the car, Amara noticed that they had pulled her over in a relatively quiet section of the street. There were houses nearby, but no pedestrians in sight. The officers positioned themselves so that their backs were to the road, effectively blocking her from view of passing cars. "Spread your legs and put your hands on the hood," Brennan instructed. "Am I under arrest?" Amara asked. "This is a search. We have reasonable suspicion." "Reasonable suspicion of what exactly?" "I'd like you to articulate that suspicion, please." Amara's legal training was kicking in. though she was careful to keep her tone respectful. Kowalski stepped closer, invading her personal space. You giving us attitude now? That just makes you more suspicious in my book. Amara placed her hands on the hood of her car, trying to remain calm. I'm not giving attitude, officer. I'm simply asking for clarification of my rights in this situation. Officer. Brennan moved behind her. I'm going to pat you down for weapons. What followed was not a standard pat-down. His hands lingered too long on her hips, her waist, beneath her breasts. Amara stiffened, feeling violated and humiliated. You smell real nice, Brennan commented as he stood uncomfortably close. What's that perfume? It's not perfume, Amara said, her voice slightly shaking now. Please conduct this search professionally or not at all. Kowalski laughed. Oh, we got a lawyer already. She knows all about professional searches. Tell me, honey, in that fancy law school. Do they teach you how many black folks get arrested in this neighborhood for talking back to officers? The racial undertone was unmistakable. Amara felt a surge of anger but fought to keep her composure. Officer, I'm going to ask again. Why was I stopped? And on what grounds are you searching me and my vehicle? Because we said so, Kowalski replied, stepping even closer. And around here, that's all the reason we need. Amara knew she was in a dangerous situation. These officers weren't following protocol, and their behavior was becoming increasingly threatening. She needed help. I'm going to call my father, she said firmly. He lives nearby. You're not calling anyone, Brennan replied. Give me that phone. No. Amara stepped back, her phone still recording in her pocket. You have no right to take my property without cause. I have not been placed under arrest. Brennan's face darkened. You want to be arrested? That can be arranged. While the officers were focused on her, Amara subtly pressed the side button on her smartwatch 3 times. The emergency signal she and her father had set up years ago. It would send her exact location to his phone with a red alert. Her father, James Johnson, had insisted on this system when she started driving. Just in case, he'd said. She'd never needed to use it until now. Officer, I understand you're doing your job, Amara said, trying a different approach. But I need to inform you that your conduct during this stop has been inappropriate and potentially unlawful. I'd like to speak with your supervising officer. Kowalski laughed again. You hear that, Brennan? She wants to speak to our supervisor. That's cute. Real cute. Brennan agreed, stepping toward her again. Maybe we should take her to the station. Let her talk to the lieutenant there. The threat hung in the air. Amara knew that getting into their police car would put her in even greater danger. She needed to stall until help arrived. May I see your badge numbers, please? She asked, her voice firm despite her fear. I'd like to note them for the record. For what record? Kowalski sneered. You think anyone's going to care about your complaints? Do you know how many complaints get filed and ignored every day? I'm still entitled to your badge numbers, Amara insisted. Brennan stepped forward, his hand moving toward her pocket where her phone was recording. I told you to hand over that phone. Amara backed away. Don't touch me or my property without legal cause, officer. The tension was interrupted by the sound of tires quickly pulling up behind the police cruiser. Amara felt a wave of relief wash over her as she recognized her father's black SUV. The officers turned, momentarily distracted by the new arrival. James Johnson stepped out of his vehicle. At 55, he carried himself with the bearing of the military. Colonel he once was before becoming one of the city's most respected civil rights attorneys. He was still in his work clothes, a crisp gray suit with a blue tie. His face was a mask of controlled fury as he assessed the situation before him. Dad? Amara called out, her voice finally betraying some of the fear she'd been holding back. The officer's demeanor changed instantly as they realized they were now being watched. James walked forward with deliberate steps, his phone held up and clearly recording. Officers, he said, his deep voice cutting through the tension. I'd like to know why my daughter has been pulled over and why you appear to be conducting a search without probable cause. Amara watched as the officers glanced at each other, their confidence visibly shaken. The confrontation was about to take a very different turn. Officer Brennan's hand dropped from its reach toward Amara's pocket. His entire body language shifted, straightening up as if suddenly remembering proper police procedure. Beside him, Officer Kowalski's smirk faded, replaced by a neutral expression that hadn't been present during the entire stop. James Johnson stood about 10 feet away, his phone steadily recording. He was careful to keep his distance and close enough to protect his daughter, but far enough to avoid giving the officers any excuse to claim he was interfering. "Good afternoon, officers," James said again, his voice carrying the weight of authority without raising its volume. "I asked why my daughter has been detained." Brennan cleared his throat. "Sir, this is a routine traffic stop. We don't need civilian interference." "I'm not interfering," James replied evenly. "I'm observing, which is my legal right. And since this involves my daughter, I have a vested interest in understanding the situation." He turned slightly to address Amara while keeping the officers in view. "Amara, are you all right?" "They pulled me over without giving a reason," Amara said, her voice steadier now that her father was present. "Then they ordered me out of the car, saying my vehicle matched some description. Officer Brennan conducted an inappropriate search and Officer Kowalski made threatening and racially charged comments." James's expression remained controlled, though his eyes narrowed slightly. "Is your phone recording?" "Yes." "The entire interaction?" Kowalski stepped forward. "Sir, you need to return to your vehicle. This is a police matter." "My name is James Johnson," he replied, ignoring the order. "I'm an attorney with Johnston, Williams, and Patel. Before that, I served 22 years in the military, retiring as a colonel." He paused to let this information sink in. "Now, I'll ask once more. On what grounds have you stopped my daughter?" The mention of James's profession caused a visible reaction in both officers. Brennan glanced at his partner before responding. "We received reports of a vehicle matching this description involved in suspicious activity in the area," Brennan said, his tone now professionally detached. "What specific suspicious activity?" James pressed. "And what specific features of my daughter's vehicle match this report?" When neither officer immediately answered, James continued. "I'd like to see the dispatch report, please. That should detail the vehicle description and nature of the suspicious activity." Kowalski shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "We don't have that information on hand." "That's unusual," James observed. "Standard procedure requires officers to have specific information before initiating a stop based on a vehicle description." He took a step closer. "Officer Kowalski, what was the nature of the suspicious activity you mentioned?" "Possible drug trafficking," Kowalski muttered, no longer making eye contact. James raised an eyebrow. "And what about this 4-year-old sedan, with university parking permits and law school stickers suggested drug trafficking to you?" Before either officer could respond, a middle-aged woman emerged from a house across the street. She was holding a phone, also recording. "I saw the whole thing," she called out. "I've been watching from my window. Those officers had no reason to stop that young lady. I was about to call 911 myself when you showed up." James nodded toward her in acknowledgement, but kept his focus on the officers. "It seems we have an independent witness as well. Now, I'll ask you directly. Were either of you wearing body cameras during this stop?" Brennan hesitated. "Yes, but they're turned off." James finished his sentence. "Or perhaps they're malfunctioning today. That would be convenient." Amara stood a little straighter now, drawing strength from her father's presence. "Officers, I'd like your badge numbers and the name and contact information for your supervising officer." Kowalski's face darkened. "Listen, we don't have to—" "Actually, you do," James interrupted. "Department policy requires officers to provide badge information when requested. You know this, Officer Kowalski." He turned to Amara. "Did they give you a reason for the pat-down search they conducted?" "They claimed reasonable suspicion but wouldn't specify what they were suspicious of," Amara replied. "And the search was—" She paused, uncomfortable with describing the details of the inappropriate contact in the open street. James understood her hesitation. "We'll document that fully later," he said quietly before turning back to the officers. I'd like to speak with your lieutenant, please. Call them now. That won't be necessary, Brennan began, but James cut him off. It is necessary, he said firmly. Either you call your supervising officer to this location immediately, or I will call the chief of police directly. I have his number. This wasn't an empty threat. As one of the city's prominent civil rights attorneys, James had worked with the police department on several reform initiatives over the years. The chief knew him personally, as did several judges and the district attorney. Brennan seemed to realize this. With visible reluctance, he reached for his radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 437. Request Lieutenant Rivera to our location. He gave the street address, then added, civilian complaint situation. James raised an eyebrow at the deliberately vague description but said nothing. The neighbor who had been watching crossed the street, still recording on her phone. She was a short woman with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a bun, wearing gardening clothes. I'm Diane Chen, she introduced herself. I live right across the street. I was working in my front room when I saw them pull you over. There was no traffic violation that I could see. She looked at Amara with concern. Are you all right, dear? I'm okay now, Amara said, touched by the woman's concern. Thank you for watching out. Ms. Chen turned to the officers, her expression hardening. I've lived in this neighborhood for 30 years. I know what profiling looks like. By now, a few other neighbors had noticed the commotion and emerged from their homes. Some stood on their porches watching. Others began approaching. A young man with glasses walked up next to Ms. Chen. I got here late. What happened? He asked. These officers pulled over this young woman for no reason, Ms. Chen explained. Then they searched her inappropriately. The growing crowd made the officers visibly uncomfortable. Kowalski muttered something to Brennan, who shook his head in response. James kept his phone recording but stepped closer to Amara. Are you hurt? He asked quietly. No, she whispered. Just shaken. Did they touch your phone or take anything from you? They tried to take my phone, but I refused. That's when you arrived. James nodded, his jaw tightening. We'll file a formal complaint today. Every detail matters, so try to remember exactly what was said and done. Amara nodded. Her legal training was already kicking in, mentally cataloging each violation of protocol and civil rights that had occurred. Within minutes, another police vehicle pulled up. A woman in a lieutenant's uniform stepped out, surveying the scene with a practiced eye. Her nameplate read Rivera. She took in the crowd of neighbors, James and Amara standing together, and her two officers looking increasingly uncomfortable. Lieutenant Rivera, James greeted her, extending his hand. I'm James Johnson. We met at the Community Oversight Committee meeting last month. Recognition flickered across Rivera's face. Mr. Johnson, she acknowledged, shaking his hand. What seems to be the problem here? Your officers conducted an unlawful stop of my daughter, James explained. They refused to provide a legitimate reason for the stop, ordered her from her vehicle without cause, conducted an inappropriate search, and made threatening and racially charged comments. All of this has been recorded, both on my daughter's phone and by neighborhood witnesses. He gestured to Ms. Chen and the other neighbors who had gathered. Lieutenant Rivera's expression remained professional, but her eyes narrowed slightly as she turned to her officers. Officers Brennan and Kowalski, step aside with me, please. The three moved several feet away, speaking in low tones. The conversation was brief but intense, with Rivera doing most of the talking while the officers repeatedly glanced back at James and the recording neighbors. After a minute, Rivera returned to James and Amara. Mr. Johnson, I'd like to apologize for any unprofessional conduct by my officers. I'd appreciate if you and your daughter would come to the station to file a formal statement about this incident. We'll be happy to file a statement, James replied. But first, I'd like confirmation that both officers will be placed on administrative leave pending an investigation, as per department policy for serious misconduct allegations. Rivera hesitated only briefly. That's standard procedure, yes. And I'd like a copy of the dispatch recording that allegedly directed these officers to stop a vehicle matching my daughter's description. That can be arranged through proper channels, Rivera said carefully. Good, James nodded. Now, are my daughter and I free to go? Or is there an actual legal reason she was detained? Rivera looked at Amara, then at her officers. You're free to go, Ms. Johnson. Again, I apologize for any unprofessional conduct. Brennan and Kowalski stood by their cruiser, their faces a mixture of frustration and concern. The crowd of neighbors remained, many still recording with their phones. We'll follow you to the station in our own vehicles, James told Rivera. I'd like to review the officer's body camera footage if it exists before we make our statement. As they walked toward their cars, Amara finally felt the full weight of what had happened. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her car door. Dad, she said quietly. If you hadn't come when you did? James placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. But I did come, he said firmly. And now we're going to make sure this never happens to anyone else in this neighborhood. He looked back at the officers who were now receiving what appeared to be a stern talking to from Lieutenant Rivera. This isn't over, Amara said, her legal mind already building the case. Not by a long shot. James nodded, his expression solemn but determined. No, it isn't. This is just the beginning. The police station lobby was brightly lit but felt cold with its hard plastic chairs and sterile white walls. Amara sat next to her father, her back straight, trying to project confidence despite the knot in her stomach. They had been waiting for 20 minutes since Lieutenant Rivera had escorted officers Brennan and Kowalski through a keycard-protected door, promising to return shortly. You're doing great, James said quietly, noticing his daughter's tense shoulders. Remember, we're in control here. Amara nodded, taking a deep breath. I keep replaying it in my head, the way they looked at me, spoke to me, like I wasn't even a person. She lowered her voice. What if we hadn't set up that emergency signal? What if you hadn't come? James's face darkened. But I did come, and now we make them answer for it. He checked his watch. I've already texted Diane Chen to thank her for speaking up. She said 6 neighbors are willing to provide statements about what they saw. Before Amara could respond, the door opened and Lieutenant Rivera emerged, followed by an older man with silver hair and a grave expression. His uniform carried the insignia of a police captain. Mr. Johnson, Ms. Johnson, Rivera said. This is Captain Howard Winters, head of our Internal Affairs Division. He'd like to be present during your statement. James stood, offering his hand to the captain. Captain Winters, I believe we met at the Civilian Oversight Committee meeting last year. The captain shook his hand firmly. We did indeed, Mr. Johnson. I wish we were meeting again under better circumstances. He turned to Amara, his expression softening slightly. Ms. Johnson, I want to personally apologize for what you experienced today. I've reviewed the preliminary information and the partial body camera footage that exists, and I'm deeply concerned by what I've seen. Amara raised an eyebrow. Partial footage? So the cameras were turned off at some point? Captain Winters' mouth tightened. Officer Brennan's camera was deactivated approximately 2 minutes after the initial stop. Officer Kowalski's remained on but had been improperly positioned. We're taking this very seriously. As you should, James said. Has the dispatch recording been pulled? The one that supposedly reported a vehicle matching my daughter's as suspicious? The captain and lieutenant exchanged glances. There was no such dispatch call, Captain Winters admitted. We've checked all communications from the last 24 hours. The confirmation of what they already suspected hit Amara hard. The stop had been completely fabricated from the beginning. She felt a cold anger building inside her. We'd like to take your statements in separate rooms if that's acceptable, Lieutenant Rivera said. It helps maintain the integrity of the investigation. My daughter will not be separated from me, James replied firmly. She's been through enough today. We'll give our statements together, or not at all. After a moment's hesitation, Captain Winters nodded. That's fine, please follow me. They were led to a small conference room rather than an interrogation room, a subtle courtesy that didn't go unnoticed by either Johnson. A civilian staff member was already inside, setting up recording equipment. This is Grace Wong, one of our civilian oversight administrators, Captain Winters explained. She'll be recording your statements and ensuring all protocols are followed. Ms. Wong, a woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor, nodded to them. Everything said in this room will be recorded, both audio and video. You'll receive copies of all files within 48 hours as required by department policy. As they settled into their chairs, the door opened again. A man in a police uniform entered, looking slightly out of breath. "Sorry I'm late," he said. "I came as soon as I heard." His nameplate read Chief Thomas. James stood immediately. "Chief Thomas, I didn't expect you to be personally involved." The chief shook his hand. "James, when I heard your name come across the wire, I knew this was serious." He turned to Amara. "Ms. Johnson, I'm Police Chief Daniel Thomas. I want you to know that I'm taking this situation extremely seriously." Amara nodded, surprised by the chief's presence, but grateful for the signal it sent about how seriously her complaint was being taken. Once everyone was seated, Ms. Wong activated the recording equipment. "Please state your names for the record." After introductions were completed, Amara began recounting her experience, starting from the moment she was pulled over. Her voice was steady as she described each detail: the officer's initial demeanor, their refusal to provide a reason for the stop, their increasingly inappropriate comments and behavior. Officer Kowalski said, and I quote, "Do they teach you how many black folks get arrested in this neighborhood for talking back to officers?" Amara stated. This was clearly intended as a racial threat. As she described the inappropriate search conducted by Officer Brennan, the chief's expression hardened visibly. His hands lingered here. Amara indicated areas on her body, her voice professional but laced with discomfort at having to recount the violations. The touching was deliberate and sexual in nature, not a standard police pat-down, James added. His perspective next, describing what he witnessed upon arrival and the officer's immediate change in demeanor when they realized who he was. When they saw me, an older black man in a suit, their behavior didn't change, James explained. It was only when I identified myself as an attorney that their demeanor shifted completely. Chief Thomas took notes throughout their statements, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When they finished, he looked directly at Amara. "Ms. Johnson, I want to be absolutely clear about something. What happened to you today represents a complete failure of this department's standards, training, and values. These officers will be held accountable." "With all due respect, Chief Thomas," Amara replied. "I've heard similar promises before. What specific actions will be taken?" The chief didn't seem offended by her directness. "Both officers have already been placed on administrative leave. Based on what I've heard today and the evidence we've reviewed, I'm initiating termination proceedings against Officer Brennan effective immediately. Officer Kowalski will face a disciplinary hearing, but I expect the outcome will be similar." "And the criminal aspects?" James asked. "Sexual harassment and civil rights violations are criminal offenses. The district attorney's office has already been notified," Captain Winters interjected. "They'll be reviewing all evidence for potential criminal charges." Lieutenant Rivera leaned forward. "Ms. Johnson, would you be willing to work with our training division in the future? Your experience as both a victim of misconduct and a law student could be invaluable in improving our training protocols." The question caught Amara off guard. Her first instinct was to refuse. Why should she help the very institution that had harmed her? But then she thought about the other young women, especially women of color, who might face similar situations. "I'll consider it," she said carefully. "But only after I see real accountability for what happened today. Actions, not promises." Chief Thomas nodded, understanding her position. "That's more than fair." As they were preparing to leave, the door opened again. Officers Brennan and Kowalski were escorted in by two uniformed officers. Amara stiffened, instinctively moving closer to her father. "What is this?" James demanded, his voice sharp. "Mr. Johnson, Ms. Johnson," Chief Thomas said quickly. "I thought you might want to hear this directly. Officers Brennan and Kowalski have something they'd like to say." Officer Brennan's face was ashen, his earlier arrogance completely gone. Beside him, Kowalski looked equally subdued. Without warning, Brennan suddenly dropped to one knee, his head bowed. "Ms. Johnson, I want to apologize for my actions today," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "What I did was completely unacceptable and inexcusable." The gesture felt theatrical and insincere. Amara took a step back, uncomfortable with the display. "Get up," James said firmly. "My daughter doesn't need your performance." Brennan rose slowly, looking embarrassed. Kowalski remained standing, looking at the floor. "I also want to apologize," Kowalski mumbled, not meeting Amara's eyes. "The things I said were wrong and unprofessional." Amara studied both men carefully. Their apologies felt hollow, motivated by fear of consequences rather than genuine remorse. Still, there was something satisfying about seeing them stripped of their previous power. "Your apologies are noted," she said simply. "But they don't erase what happened." Chief Thomas turned to the officers. "Return your badges and service weapons to Captain Winters immediately. You'll be escorted to collect your personal belongings, then leave department property. Do not speak to the press. Do not contact Ms. Johnson or any witnesses. Is that clear?" Both men nodded mutely. As they were led away, Amara felt a complex mix of emotions: relief, vindication, but also a lingering sense of violation that no apology could erase. "You did well," James said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Very well." Outside the police station, the late afternoon sun was beginning to set. Amara took a deep breath of fresh air, feeling as though she'd been holding her breath for hours. "What happens now?" she asked her father as they walked to their cars. "Now?" James considered the question. "Now we make sure this case isn't buried or minimized. We follow through with the district attorney. We speak to the community oversight board, and we consider our legal options." Amara nodded, her mind already shifting to the legal aspects of what had occurred. Civil rights violations, sexual harassment, abuse of power. "Yes," James agreed. "But that's tomorrow's battle. Right now, let's go home. Your mother is worried sick, and I think we both could use some rest." As they reached their vehicles, Amara paused. "Dad? Thank you. For coming when I called. For knowing exactly what to do." James's expression softened. "I've spent my whole career fighting these battles, Amara. I just never thought you'd have to fight one too." He hugged her tightly. "I'm so proud of how you handled yourself today." Driving home, Amara replayed the day's events in her mind, from terror to vindication in just a few hours. But she knew this was just the beginning of a much longer journey, one that would test her commitment to the very principles that had drawn her to law school in the first place. The news vans were already parked outside the Johnson family home by the time Amara woke up the next morning. She peeked through her bedroom curtains and counted 4 different station logos on the vehicles lining their quiet suburban street. Her phone had been buzzing with notifications since 5 a.m., friends sending links to news stories, social media mentions, and text messages asking if she was okay. Somehow, the story had leaked. Downstairs, she found her mother, Elaine, calmly making breakfast as if it were any ordinary day. At 53, Elaine Johnson was a picture of composed elegance even in her simple Saturday morning attire of jeans and a light sweater. As a hospital administrator, she had mastered the art of handling crises without showing stress. "Good morning, sweetheart," Elaine said, sliding a plate of French toast toward her daughter. "Your father's in his office making calls. He thought it would be better to get ahead of this before the narrative spins out of control." Amara nodded, taking a seat at the kitchen island. "How did they find out so quickly?" "One of the neighbors posted about it online," Elaine explained. "She meant well, wanted to warn others about those officers, but once it got picked up by local social media accounts..." She shrugged, letting the rest go unsaid. Amara's phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Diane Chen. "Reporters. Asking for interviews. Told them I won't speak without your permission. Let me know what you want me to do." As she was typing a response, her father appeared in the doorway, looking tired but determined. "I've just gotten off the phone with the district attorney. James announced. "They're expediting the review of your case. The body camera footage and witness statements have already been submitted." "That was fast," Amara remarked. James nodded. "The chief is personally pushing it through. I think he's genuinely concerned about department reputation, but also," he paused, looking troubled. "He mentioned this isn't the first complaint about those two officers. Just the first one with overwhelming evidence and a victim they can't easily dismiss." The implication hung heavily in the air. How many others had suffered similar treatment without James's connections or Amara's legal knowledge? How many cases had been buried or dismissed? "The press wants a statement," Elaine said, gesturing toward the window. "They've been calling nonstop since dawn." James looked at Amara. "This is your experience, your story. It should be your decision how public you want this to become." Amara considered this carefully. As a law student, she understood the power of public attention in civil rights cases, but she also knew the scrutiny and potential backlash that came with it. "If we go public," she said slowly, "it might help other victims come forward. But I don't want this to become just another viral outrage that fades in a week. I want real change." "Then that's what we focus on," James agreed. "Not just what happened to you, but the systemic issues it represents." A sharp knock at the front door interrupted their conversation. Through the frosted glass, they could see a figure in what appeared to be a police uniform. James went to answer it, opening the door to reveal Lieutenant Rivera. She looked tired, as if she hadn't slept much. "Mr. Johnson," she said formally, "I apologize for coming to your home, but I thought you should hear this in person, rather than through official channels." James invited her inside, leading her to the living room where Amara and Elaine joined them. "Officer Brennan has been officially terminated," Rivera announced without preamble. The police union was shown the evidence and declined to contest the decision. "Officer Kowalski has been suspended pending his disciplinary hearing, but given the circumstances, termination is the expected outcome there as well." Amara felt a rush of vindication, quickly followed by wariness. "That was unusually quick." Lieutenant Rivera nodded. "The chief made it a priority. He's concerned this could grow into something much bigger if not handled decisively." She hesitated before adding, "There's something else. Since news of the incident began circulating, 3 other women have come forward with similar complaints against Officer Brennan. 2 of them filed reports that were apparently buried at the precinct level." James's expression darkened. "And who buried them?" "We're investigating that now," Rivera assured him. "The chief has authorized a complete review of all complaint procedures. He'd like to meet with you both again to discuss potential reforms." After Lieutenant Rivera left, the family gathered in the kitchen to process this new information. "They're in damage control mode," Elaine observed, "trying to get ahead of a potential scandal." "Maybe," James acknowledged. "But if that motivates real change, does the motivation matter?" Amara stared out the window at the news vans. "I think I should make a statement," she decided, "but I want to be smart about it. No emotional interviews or clickbait headlines, just the facts and a call for accountability and reform." Her parents exchanged proud glances. "I'll help you prepare," James offered, "and I know some reporters who will present this fairly." By noon, they had crafted a careful statement. Amara stood in their driveway, facing a small forest of microphones and cameras. She wore a simple blue blazer over a white blouse, professional but not flashy. Her father stood slightly behind her, a supportive presence but allowing her to take the lead. "Yesterday afternoon, I was unlawfully stopped, detained, and harassed by 2 police officers," Amara began, her voice steady. "Their conduct was not only unprofessional but predatory, racist, and criminal in nature. What happened to me is not an isolated incident. It represents a pattern of behavior that has victimized others in our community." She detailed the events clearly but without sensationalism, emphasizing the systemic nature of the problem. "I'm speaking out, not just to seek justice for myself, but to ensure that no one else experiences what I and others have endured. I'm calling for a comprehensive review of police training, oversight, and accountability in our city." This isn't about vilifying all police officers. It's about making sure those who abuse their power face consequences. As she concluded her statement, a reporter called out, "Ms. Johnson, how do you feel about Officer Brennan kneeling and apologizing to you?" Amara paused, considering her words carefully. His gesture came only after he was caught, only after his superiors were involved, and only when he realized his job was at stake. It wasn't remorse. It was fear of consequences. Real accountability isn't about performative apologies. It's about changing behaviors and systems that allow abuses to occur. Another reporter pushed forward. "Your father is a well-known civil rights attorney. Do you think you received special treatment because of his connections?" The question stung, but Amara had anticipated it. "The fact that I needed my father's legal expertise and connections to receive basic justice is precisely the problem. Every citizen deserves equal protection and respect under the law, regardless of who their parents are or what resources they have. My case received attention because of factors that shouldn't matter, and that means the system is broken for everyone else." After the press conference, messages of support began flooding in, women sharing similar experiences, community advocates offering alliance, law professors commending her composure and clarity, but not all responses were positive. Online forums filled with dismissive comments questioning her account, minimizing the officer's actions or attacking her for playing the race card. Some commenters even suggested she should be grateful nothing worse had happened. That evening, as Amara scrolled through the mixed reactions on her phone, she felt a wave of exhaustion. The adrenaline that had carried her through the past 24 hours was fading, leaving raw emotions in its wake. "You should see this," her father said, entering her room with his laptop. "It's an email from a former officer at the same precinct." Amara read the message carefully. The writer claimed to have left the force 6 months earlier after witnessing a pattern of misconduct by several officers, including Brennan and Kowalski. They had documentation they were willing to share, evidence that complaints had been systematically buried by a small group of supervising officers. "This could be huge," Amara said, looking up at her father. "This isn't just about 2 bad officers. It's about the people who protected them." James nodded. "I've already replied. We're meeting them tomorrow at my office." Later that night, as the house finally grew quiet, Amara sat on her bed reviewing her civil rights law textbook. The theoretical principles she'd been studying now felt viscerally real. She turned to a chapter on consent decrees, federal oversight, imposed on police departments with patterns of civil rights violations. Her phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. She opened it cautiously. "This is Tanya. I was stopped by Brennan last year. The same thing happened to me, but nobody believed me. Thank you for speaking out. Would you be willing to talk?" Amara stared at the message for a long moment, then began typing her reply. "Yes, you're not alone anymore." She set down her phone and glanced at the stack of casebooks on her desk. Tomorrow she would skip her study group. There was more important work to be done. Building a case that could change not just individual officers' behavior, but the system that had protected them. As she drifted towards sleep, Amara realized something had shifted within her. The career path she had envisioned for herself, corporate law, financial security, prestige, suddenly seemed hollow compared to the work that lay before her now. For the first time, she truly understood her father's lifelong commitment to civil rights law. This wasn't just about justice for herself anymore. It was about all the Tanyas who had never been heard. 6 months later, Amara stood at the podium in City Hall, looking out at the packed chamber. Camera flashes periodically lit up the room as photographers captured what many were calling a historic moment. Behind her sat her parents alongside Chief Thomas, Mayor Wilson, and representatives from the Department of Justice. In the audience, she spotted Diane Chen and other neighbors who had spoken up that fateful day. In the third row, Tanya and 4 other women who had come forward with similar experiences watched with expressions of cautious hope. "Today marks a significant step forward," Amara began, her voice clear and confident. "The consent decree being signed today is not the end of our journey toward police accountability, but rather a crucial beginning. The journey to this moment had been anything but easy. In the weeks following the incident, Amara had put her law studies on partial hold, throwing herself into building a comprehensive civil rights case with her father's firm. The whistleblower, former Sergeant Lee, had provided crucial evidence showing how complaints against certain officers were systematically buried or minimized. When 3 more women came forward with similar experiences involving officers, Brennan and Kowalski, the district attorney, had finally brought criminal charges against both men. Officer Kowalski had quickly taken a plea deal, agreeing to testify against not only Brennan but also the supervisors who had protected them. This agreement requires meaningful changes, Amara continued, outlining the key provisions. Mandatory body cameras that cannot be deactivated during civilian interactions. An independent civilian review board with real authority. Comprehensive retraining on racial bias and appropriate conduct. And most importantly, a transparent complaint process that ensures every voice is heard regardless of who you are or who you know. As she spoke, Amara recalled the grueling depositions, the threats on social media, and the constant scrutiny that had filled these past months. There had been dark days when she questioned whether the fight was worth the personal cost. Moments when the pressure felt overwhelming, when anonymous online harassers had published her address, forcing her family to temporarily relocate. But for every hateful message, there had been dozens of supportive ones. For every legal roadblock, there had been a breakthrough. The tide of public opinion had shifted dramatically when Officer Kowalski's testimony revealed a years-long pattern of targeted harassment of young women of color in certain neighborhoods. Neighborhoods like Amara's, where residents were less likely to have the resources or connections to fight back. This consent decree matters not because it punishes individual officers, but because it creates systems that prevent abuse of power, Amara explained. It matters because it acknowledges that what happened to me and others was not a series of isolated incidents, but symptoms of deeper problems that required structural solutions. She glanced at Chief Thomas, whose initial damage control had evolved into genuine commitment to reform. He had faced resistance from within his department, particularly from older officers and the police union, but had surprised many with his willingness to embrace substantial changes. I want to acknowledge Chief Thomas, who could have chosen the path of least resistance but instead chose the harder road of real reform, Amara said, nodding toward him. Change cannot happen without leaders willing to challenge established norms and admit when systems have failed. After the formal signing ceremony, Amara found herself surrounded by well-wishers and reporters. A local news crew requested a statement, positioning her next to the city's newly installed Civil Rights Memorial, a project that had been fast-tracked after the case gained national attention. Ms. Johnson, now that the consent decree has been signed, what's next for you? The reporter asked, microphone extended. Amara smiled. I'm going back to law school to finish my degree, but I'm also launching the Community Justice Initiative with my father's firm, a non-profit focused on providing legal support to victims of police misconduct who might not otherwise have access to representation. And the funding for this initiative? The settlement for my case is providing the initial funding, Amara explained. But we've also received grants and donations from community organizations committed to police accountability. The settlement had been substantial, not just financial compensation for Amara and the other victims, but a commitment from the city to fund community-based oversight programs. The money had never been the point for Amara, but she understood its power to create lasting change when directed properly. Later that evening, the Johnson family hosted a small gathering at their home. The attendees included Diane Chen and other neighbors who had stood with Amara from the beginning, Tanya and several other women who had come forward, former Sergeant Lee, Lieutenant Rivera, who had been promoted after helping expose the cover-ups, and Professor Washington, Amara's civil rights law professor who had become a mentor throughout the process. I have something for you, Professor Washington said, handing Amara a small box. Inside was a business card holder engraved with the words, "Speak truth to power." For when you join the bar, the professor explained, which I have no doubt you will, with flying colors. Amara thanked her, feeling a surge of emotion. The path ahead was clearer now. Not easier, but clearer. She had discovered her purpose through trauma, finding her voice as an advocate not just for herself but for others. Across the room, Tanya was deep in conversation with Lieutenant Rivera. Their unlikely alliance had been crucial in identifying other victims and building the broader case against systemic failures in the department. Tanya had started taking classes at the community college, inspired by Amara's example to pursue a degree in social work. "Your daughter is quite remarkable," Diane Chen said to James and Elaine as they stood watching Amara mingle with the guests. "You must be very proud." "We are," Elaine replied, "though I wish her awakening had come through less traumatic means." James nodded, his expression a mixture of pride and lingering concern. "She's discovered her purpose, but this work comes with a cost. The backlash hasn't entirely subsided. Indeed, even after the consent decree, there remained vocal critics. Some police officers viewed the reforms as an attack on law enforcement rather than necessary accountability. Conservative media outlets occasionally ran stories painting Amara and the other women as attention seekers who had exaggerated their experiences. And there were still occasional threatening messages that required security precautions. But there was also undeniable progress. Officer Brennan had been convicted on multiple counts and was serving time. 3 supervisors who had systematically buried complaints had been removed from their positions. The police academy had completely overhauled its training on racial bias and appropriate conduct, and applications for the new civilian oversight board had flooded in, with community members eager to be part of the solution. As the evening wound down, Amara found herself standing on the back porch with her father looking up at the stars. "Do you remember what you told me on career day in 5th grade?" she asked him. "When I said I wanted to be a lawyer like you?" James smiled at the memory. "I told you that being a lawyer wasn't just about knowing the law. It was about using the law to make the world more just." "I didn't fully understand what that meant until now," Amara admitted. "Law school taught me legal theories and precedents, but these past months taught me how to actually use those tools to create change." "It's not an easy path," James cautioned. "There will be cases you lose, reforms that get watered down, progress that seems painfully slow." "I know," Amara nodded. "But I've also seen what's possible when people refuse to stay silent, when communities come together, when pressure is applied in the right places." She turned to look at the gathering through the window, the unlikely coalition of individuals who had made this moment possible. "I'm not naive enough to think we've solved everything, but we've created openings for more change." James put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "Your mother and I worried about you these past months. The stress, the public scrutiny, the threats. We wondered if it might be better for you to step back, let others carry the fight forward." "I know you did," Amara acknowledged, "and there were days I wondered that myself. But every time I spoke with Tanya or the others, every time I got a message from someone saying our case gave them courage to come forward about their own experience, I knew I couldn't walk away." Inside, Elaine called everyone together for a toast. As they raised their glasses, Professor Washington spoke. "To justice, not as an abstract ideal, but as something we must actively build together, day by day." Amara looked around the room at the faces of those who had stood with her through this journey. Family, neighbors, fellow survivors, allies within the system, and new friends made along the way. The road had been difficult and there were surely more challenges ahead, but standing there, surrounded by this community of support, she felt something she hadn't fully experienced since that day 6 months ago. Hope. Not naive optimism that everything was fixed, but a grounded hope born from witnessing what collective action could accomplish. A hope that understood the reality of the struggle yet refused to surrender to cynicism. As conversations resumed around her, Amara made a quiet promise to herself. This was just the beginning. There were many more voices waiting to be heard, many more systems needing reform, many more battles to be fought, and she was ready.